The dawn broke red over the harbor, as if the sky itself bled in anticipation of what was to come. 50 warships formed an impenetrable crescent around the port, their cannons gleaming like the teeth of a great beast. The salt air carried the scent of gunpowder and tar, mixed with the prayers whispered by thousands who watched from the stone walls of the fortress. At the center of it all stood Admiral Cornelius Blackwood, a man whose very name made pirates abandon their plunder and flee to safer waters. His uniform was pristine, decorated with medals that told stories of conquered seas and sunken enemies. His weathered face, carved by years of sun and storm, showed no emotion as he surveyed the scene below. Beside him, officers awaited his command with trembling hands on their sword hilts. The entire empire held its breath, but his daughter, Eleanor Blackwood, stood apart from the military procession. While others focused on the Armada's overwhelming power, her eyes were locked on a single vessel, a ship as black as midnight, its sails torn but defiant, anchored defiantly in the center of the harbor. On its deck, a lone figure stood with arms crossed, facing the 50 ships without fear. Captain Silas Thorne. The name was spoken in whispers across every tavern and dock, from Lisbon to the Caribbean. Some called him a demon, others a liberator. To the crown, he was a plague that needed extermination. But to Eleanor, he was something else entirely. A memory that haunted her dreams, a voice that echoed in the chambers of her heart. "Father," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Must it come to this?" The admiral did not turn. "He has stolen from the crown, murdered our soldiers, and corrupted good men into outlaws. Justice demands his execution." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the stone balustrade. 3 months ago, she had been a prisoner on that very ship, captured during a diplomatic voyage that went horribly wrong. The crown expected her to return traumatized, broken. Instead, she came back changed, with secrets burning behind her eyes and a compass hidden beneath her pillow that pointed not north, but to him. During those weeks at sea, Silas had treated her not as hostage, but as equal. He taught her to read the stars, to feel the soul of the ocean beneath her feet. He spoke of freedom not as chaos, but as the purest form of existence, a life unbound by the chains of expectation and title. And in the quiet moments between storms, when the crew slept and only the moon bore witness, they had shared conversations that felt like prayers. "He showed me mercy," Eleanor said, louder now. "When he could have used me for ransom, he returned me unharmed. A tactical mistake," her father replied coldly. "One he will pay for with his life." Below, Silas remained motionless on his deck. Even from this distance, Eleanor could see the silver glint of the compass he wore, the twin to hers, bound by a promise made under starlight. "If we ever face impossible odds," he had told her, "hold the compass and know that somewhere I'm holding mine too. And maybe that's enough to change fate." A lieutenant approached the admiral. "Sir, the men are ready. We can open fire on your command." "The pirate ship won't last 5 minutes under coordinated bombardment." Admiral Blackwood raised his hand, and the entire harbor seemed to freeze. Drummers positioned their mallets. Gunners touched flame to fuse. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she gripped her hidden compass. Then, impossibly, Silas raised his hand in a mirror gesture, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. Across the distance, through smoke and salt and the weight of empires, his eyes found hers. And in that moment, Eleanor understood. He wasn't here to escape. He was here to force a choice. Hers. "Father," she said, stepping forward, "before you give that order, there's something you must know." The admiral's jaw tightened. "Eleanor, return to your quarters. This is not, 'I love him.'" The words fell like cannonballs into water, sending ripples through the assembled officers. Some gasped. Others reached for their swords instinctively, as if love itself were an enemy to be cut down. Admiral Blackwood finally turned to face his daughter, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor saw something crack in his iron exterior. "What did you say?" "I love him," she repeated, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. And if you destroy him, you destroy the only part of me that learned what it means to truly live." The admiral's hand remained raised, frozen between command and catastrophe. 50 ships waited. One pirate smiled sadly from his black vessel, and a daughter stood between two worlds, her compass burning hot against her heart, knowing that whatever happened next would either break her completely or set her finally. Terrifyingly free, the silence stretched. Then Admiral Blackwood spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lower your hand, Lieutenant." No one fires yet. The tension in the harbor was suffocating. Officers exchanged confused glances as Admiral Blackwood's command hung in the air like smoke. No one dared question him, but the unspoken questions buzzed through the ranks. Why the hesitation? Why hadn't the pirate been blown to splinters already? Eleanor's confession had fractured something fundamental. Her father stood rigid, his hand slowly lowering, as if it carried the weight of the entire fleet. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, older, haunted by something beyond the present moment. "Come with me," he said to Eleanor, then strode toward a private chamber in the fortress tower without waiting for response. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding. Behind them, the officers remained at their posts, and below, Silas's black ship rocked gently on the waves, still defiant, still waiting. The admiral's private study was a museum of conquest, maps covering every wall, weapons from defeated enemies mounted like trophies, and a massive oak desk scarred by decades of strategy sessions. But he walked past all of it, stopping before a locked cabinet in the corner. He produced a key from inside his jacket and opened it, revealing a single object, a compass, ancient and ornate, identical to the one Eleanor carried and the one she'd seen around Silas's neck. "Where did you get that?" Eleanor breathed. The admiral lifted the compass gently as if it were made of glass. "Your mother gave this to me 30 years ago before she died. She made me promise never to open it, never to follow where it pointed. I kept that promise. Until today." Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Mother? What does she have to do with—" "Your mother wasn't born into nobility, Eleanor. That's a lie I've maintained to protect you, to protect her memory." His fingers traced the compass's edge. "She was born on a ship. Her father was a captain, not of the Navy, but of something far older. A brotherhood that existed before empires drew their borders, before kings claimed the seas. Pirates," Eleanor whispered. "Guardians," the admiral corrected. "They called themselves the keepers of the horizon. They believed the ocean belonged to no crown, that freedom was a sacred trust to be protected. Your grandfather captained their flagship until the crown hunted them down, one by one. Your mother escaped, hid her identity, and eventually, I met her." He opened the compass, and Eleanor gasped. Inside, instead of a normal needle, there was a miniature astrolabe, its mechanisms impossibly intricate. And carved into the metal were words in an ancient script: 3 hearts, 1 fate, bound by tide and time. "These compasses were made by the first keepers," the admiral continued. "Legend says they were forged from a meteorite that fell into the sea centuries ago. The metal carries properties no blacksmith can explain. When 3 compasses exist, they form a bond, a connection between souls that transcends distance and even death." Eleanor pulled out her own compass, hands shaking. "3, but there are only— there were 3, her father interrupted. "Your grandfather's, which I assumed was lost when he died. Your mother's, which she gave to me. And one other, which she said would find its way to the 3rd heart when the time was right." His eyes met hers with devastating clarity. "Silas Thorne carries your grandfather's compass." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, mind racing through implications. "That's impossible. Grandfather died before I was born. How would Silas— Captain Silas Thorne," the admiral said slowly, "is not his real name. 20 years ago, when I was hunting the last of the keepers, I cornered a ship near the Devil's Backbone. Among the dead, I found a boy, no more than 8 years old, clutching a compass and a letter. The letter was from your grandfather, written before his death, instructing whoever found the boy to protect him, to teach him the ways of the sea." Because he carried the blood of the guardians and the heart of the storm. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. What did you do? I should have killed him. The crown demanded it. But your mother, she recognized the compass. She begged me to spare him, to send him away where he could never threaten us. So I gave him to a merchant vessel with enough coin to start a life far from the sea. The admiral's face hardened. He became a pirate anyway. Took his revenge on the empire that destroyed his family. And now he's here, holding the compass that binds him to my dead wife and my living daughter. Eleanor stood, her compass open in her palm. The needle didn't point north. It pointed directly at the harbor, towards Silas's ship. And when she concentrated, she could feel it, a pulse like a heartbeat, syncing with her own. The legend says the three hearts must unite, or the ocean itself will rise to claim what's owed. Her father said grimly, Your mother made me promise that if the compasses ever called to each other, I wouldn't interfere. That the choice would be yours and his. He closed his compass with a snap. But I'm an admiral of the empire, Eleanor. I can't just let him sail away. Then what do we do? Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face. Before her father could answer, an explosion rocked the fortress. Both ran to the window. One of the warships was burning, its mainmast collapsing into the sea. Confusion rippled through the fleet as sailors scrambled to identify the attacker. Then Eleanor saw it, emerging from the morning mist. 3 more ships appeared, their flags bearing the ancient symbol of the keepers. A compass rose wrapped in waves. They were older vessels, thought lost to history, but they moved with supernatural grace through the water, and on the lead ship's deck stood a figure in white robes, holding high a glowing compass that pulsed with the same rhythm Eleanor felt in her own. A voice echoed across the harbor, amplified by means Eleanor couldn't explain. The 3 hearts are called. The pact must be honored. Admiral Blackwood, release the Guardian, or watch your empire drown. Admiral Blackwood's face went pale. The 3rd keeper. I thought the line had ended. Eleanor gripped her compass tighter. Father, what have you done? What I thought was right, he said quietly. But it seems the ocean hasn't forgotten, and neither has fate. Chaos erupted across the harbor. The 50 warships scrambled to reposition, their neat formation dissolving as the ghostly vessels of the keepers wove between them like phantoms. Fire bloomed on another Imperial ship. Though no cannonball had struck it, the wood simply ignited, as if the sea itself had decided to burn. Eleanor stood frozen at the tower window, her compass vibrating in her hand with such intensity it became almost painful to hold. The pulse grew stronger, faster, matching the approaching storm clouds that gathered overhead with unnatural speed. Lightning cracked across the sky, though no thunder followed, just an eerie, singing silence. This is impossible, Admiral Blackwood muttered, reaching for his sword out of pure instinct. The keepers were destroyed. I made certain... You made certain of nothing, Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying a strange resonance, as if the ocean spoke through her. You took a child's family, scattered a sacred brotherhood, and thought the debt would simply disappear. But the sea remembers, Father. The sea always remembers. The Admiral stared at his daughter as if seeing a stranger. Eleanor, what's happening to you? She looked down at her hands. Her skin seemed to shimmer with a faint, pearlescent glow, the same luminescence that danced across the waves below. The compass is waking something. I can feel it, pulling me toward the water. Toward him. On the black ship, Silas stood at the helm, his own compass blazing like a small sun. Eleanor could see him even from this distance, and in that moment their eyes locked across the impossible expanse. She felt his heartbeat as clearly as her own. His fear, his determination, his love. Come to me, his voice whispered in her mind, though his lips never moved. It's the only way to end this without bloodshed. The pact requires all 3. What pact? Eleanor asked aloud, though she knew her father couldn't hear the conversation only she could perceive. The white-robed figure on the keeper ship raised both arms, and the sea began to rise. Not in waves, but in a solid column of water that twisted upward like a living serpent, climbing higher than the fortress walls, defying every law of nature. Sailors screamed and dove for cover as the waterspout hovered over the harbor. A liquid sword poised to strike. The amplified voice boomed again. 500 years ago, 3 captains made a pact with the ocean itself. In exchange for safe passage and mastery of the waves, they promised their bloodlines would serve as guardians, protectors against those who would corrupt the sea with tyranny and greed. The pact binds 3 families, Drake, Morgana, and Thorn. When the compass bearers unite, they renew the vow. When they refuse, the ocean collects its debt. Admiral Blackwood's face went ashen. Drake. Your mother's maiden name was Catherine Drake. Dear God, I never connected. You married into the pact, Eleanor realized. And I inherited it. That's why Mother gave you the compass, why she made you promise. She knew this day would come. The waterspout began to rotate, and the wind howled with voices, hundreds of them speaking in unison. Admiral Cornelius Blackwood, you have raised the Drake daughter. You have hunted the Thorn son. You have prevented the Morgana heir from completing the circle. The ocean grows impatient. Surrender the guardians to their destiny, or watch your empire sink beneath the waves. An officer burst into the chamber, his uniform soaked and smoking. Sir, the ships are taking water from below, not from leaks, but the sea itself is rising inside them. Men are drowning on deck while standing in sunshine. It's witchcraft, it's the pact, Eleanor said firmly. She walked past her father toward the door. And I'm going to honor it. The Admiral grabbed her arm. Eleanor, you don't understand what you're agreeing to. If you go to him, if you complete this ritual or whatever madness this is, you'll be bound to the sea forever. You'll never return to normal life. You'll become something other. Eleanor met his eyes with the full weight of her choice. I was never meant for a normal life, Father. You knew that the moment you married a Drake. Mother knew it. And deep down, you knew it when you spared that 8-year-old boy. You tried to defy the pact, but fate always finds its way. She pulled free and ran down the tower stairs, her compass glowing brighter with each step. Behind her, she heard her father shouting orders, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if she were already underwater. Eleanor emerged onto the fortress courtyard where soldiers stood in paralyzed confusion, watching the supernatural storm above. She didn't hesitate. She ran to the edge of the wall and dove into the harbor. The water should have been cold, but it felt like silk against her skin. Her dress, heavy with embroidery and propriety, dissolved into the current, leaving her in simple, flowing garments that moved like kelp. She didn't need to swim. The ocean carried her, gentle as a mother's arms, directly toward the black ship. Silas leaned over the railing, reaching down. Their hands clasped, and the moment they touched, the entire harbor erupted in light. The 3 compasses blazed in unison, his at his chest, hers around her neck, and the third held high by the keeper on the distant ship. He pulled her aboard, and they stood face to face, soaking wet, surrounded by impossible magic and the weight of centuries. You came, he breathed. Did you doubt I would? I hoped, but hope and certainty are different seas. His hand cupped her face. Eleanor, if we do this, if we accept the pact, there's no returning to who we were. We become the ocean's servants, bound to protect it, to judge those who would harm it. We give up everything else. Eleanor pressed her forehead against his. Everything else is already lost. The moment I saw you that first day on this ship, my old life ended. I just didn't realize it until now. Above them, the white-robed keeper descended from the waterspout, stepping onto solid air as if the sky was stone. Up close, Eleanor could see this was a woman, ancient beyond measure, with eyes like tide pools and hair that moved like seaweed in wind. The 3rd heart arrives, the keeper said, her voice gentle now. Morgana's heir, last of the bloodline. You are ready to speak the words? Silas and Eleanor looked at each other, then nodded in unison. The keeper raised her compass, and theirs rose to meet it, floating between them in a triangle of light. The ocean calmed. The warships stopped burning. Even the wind held its breath. Then speak the oath, and bind yourselves to the eternal tide. Together, their voices harmonizing as if they'd practiced for lifetimes, they spoke, We are the guardians born of storm. We are the keepers of the deep. Where tyranny sails, we bring the squall. Where freedom drowns, we surface hope. Our blood is salt, our hearts are tide. And until the last wave breaks upon the final shore, we serve the ocean. And the ocean serves the free. The three compasses shattered into light, and that light poured into them, into their eyes, their mouths, their very souls. Eleanor gasped, as power unlike anything she'd ever imagined flooded her veins. She could feel every drop of water in the harbor, sense every life swimming beneath the surface, hear the grinding of continents on the ocean floor. When the light faded, they stood transformed, still themselves, but more. Their eyes held the color of deep water. Their skin carried the faint shimmer of pearls. And when they looked at each other, they saw not just two people, but two parts of a greater whole. The keeper smiled. The pact is renewed. The ocean is satisfied. Go forth, guardians, and remember, freedom is not the absence of rules, but the presence of justice. Protect those who cannot protect themselves, and may your love be the compass that guides you through every storm. She dissolved into mist, and her ship simply sank peacefully beneath the waves, as if it had only ever been made of sea foam and memory. Eleanor turned to face the fortress, where her father stood at the wall watching. Even from this distance, she could see tears streaming down his weathered face. He raised his hand, not in command this time, but in farewell. In acceptance. He's letting us go, she whispered. He's letting you choose, Silas corrected. That's different and harder. The 50 warships remained motionless in the harbor, their captains awaiting orders that never came. Admiral Blackwood stood alone on the fortress wall, his hand still raised in that ambiguous gesture, half blessing, half surrender. For the first time in his decorated career, he looked fragile, human, small against the vastness of the sea he'd spent his life trying to conquer. Eleanor felt the pull to return to him, to explain, to soften the blow of her choice. But Silas's hand tightened around hers, and she understood. Going back now would only make the severing more painful. Some goodbyes had to be clean, even when they shattered hearts. He'll be all right, Silas said quietly, reading her thoughts as he seemed able to do now. The pact doesn't demand cruelty. He can still be the admiral. We're simply no longer his to command. The black ship began to move, without anyone touching the wheel, gliding through the fleet like a shadow through candlelight. Sailors watched from their decks, weapons lowered, as if some unspoken understanding had passed through the entire armada. This was no longer their fight. The ocean itself had chosen sides, and wise men didn't argue with tides. As they passed the last warship, a young lieutenant, barely older than Eleanor, called out, "Where will you go?" Eleanor looked back at him, surprised anyone dared speak. Then she smiled, and her voice carried across the water with preternatural clarity, "Wherever the ocean needs us. Wherever freedom is drowning. Wherever the powerful forget that the sea belongs to no one." The lieutenant nodded slowly, and Eleanor could have sworn she saw him touch his chest in salute, not to the admiral's daughter, but to something else. A guardian, a myth made flesh. The ship sailed beyond the harbor mouth, and the moment they crossed into open water, everything changed. The vessel seemed to breathe, its timbers groaning with satisfaction, its sails filling with wind that came from no earthly direction. The crew, rough men who'd followed Silas through hell and hurricanes, emerged from below deck, staring at their captain and his companion with new eyes. "Captain," the first mate said, "a scarred giant named Rourke, who'd never shown fear in his life. Begging your pardon, but you're different, both of you. The men are wondering if their captain is still human." Silas finished. He glanced at Eleanor, and they shared a smile that contained oceans. "That's a fair question, Rourke. The answer is more or less. I'm still me. She's still herself. But we're also something the sea needed us to become. Guardians," Eleanor added, finding the word fit comfortably on her tongue. "Protectors of those the empires forget. Your captain made a choice to honor an ancient pact, and I made the choice to stand with him. If that troubles any of you, now's the time to speak." The crew exchanged glances. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, they began to kneel, not in subservience, but in acknowledgement. Rourke spoke for them all. "We followed Captain Thorne because he never claimed to be righteous, only free. If he's become something more, then we're proud to sail with him still. And you, miss, or whatever title you carry now, you chose the sea over an empire. That earns respect in my book." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed in her father's study. These were tears of belonging, of finding a family she'd never known she needed. "Then we sailed together," Silas declared. "Not as pirates anymore, but as guardians. We'll hunt slavers instead of merchant ships. We'll protect fishing villages from corrupt governors. We'll be the storm that rises when injustice thinks itself safe." The crew roared approval, and the ship surged forward as if celebrating with them. As night fell, Eleanor and Silas stood at the bow, watching stars emerge like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The compasses were gone, but Eleanor could still feel that connection, that pulse that said she was never truly alone, that somewhere in the vastness of the ocean, other guardians moved through the darkness, serving the same ancient purpose. "Do you regret it?" Silas asked softly. "Everything you gave up?" Eleanor thought of her father's face, of the soft bed she'd slept in, of the society balls and diplomatic dinners, and the safe, predictable life that had been planned for her since birth. Then she thought of this, wind in her hair, salt on her lips, a man beside her who saw her soul and didn't flinch, and a purpose vast as the ocean itself. "I gave up a comfortable cage," she said, "in exchange for an infinite horizon. No, Silas, I don't regret it for a heartbeat." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and the sea rose around them in gentle waves, as if applauding. Far behind them, in the harbour that grew smaller with each passing moment, Admiral Cornelius Blackwood stood alone in his study. He held his wife's compass, the one she'd given him 30 years ago, and finally, for the first time since her death, he opened it fully and read the inscription inside. "When the third heart calls, let her answer. Love sometimes means letting go. You're Catherine." He closed the compass gently and placed it back in its cabinet. Then he walked to his desk, picked up his quill, and began to write a letter to the Crown, to His Majesty's Admiralty. "The pirate known as Silas Thorne has been driven from imperial waters. He will not return to threaten our shores. The matter is closed. Furthermore, my daughter Eleanor has chosen a life at sea, as is her right upon reaching majority. I will not pursue her, nor expect the Navy to do so. Some battles cannot be won with cannons. Some children are born belonging to something greater than family. I have made my peace with this. I suggest the Empire do the same." He signed it with a steady hand, though tears fell upon the parchment, smudging the ink. Then he walked to the window and watched the horizon, where his daughter had disappeared. And for the first time in decades, Admiral Cornelius Blackwood smiled. "Sail well, Eleanor," he whispered to the night. "Your mother would be so proud." On the black ship racing toward dawn, Eleanor suddenly turned, as if hearing her name on the wind. She touched her chest where the compass had been, feeling the echo of its warmth. And somehow she knew. Her father had let her go, not because he stopped loving her, but because he loved her enough to choose her happiness over his own heart. "Thank you," she whispered back, and trusted the ocean would carry her words home. Silas took her hand. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Eleanor looked at the vast, unknowable sea stretching before them, full of danger and wonder, and 1,000 stories yet to be lived. She thought of the villages they'd protect, the tyrants they'd humble, the freedom they'd guard with every breath. "With you," she said, squeezing his fingers, "I'm ready for everything." The ship sailed into legend, carrying 2 hearts that had chosen each other against 50 warships, 1 empire, and fate itself. Behind them, the sun rose over the harbour, painting the world in gold. Ahead, the horizon beckoned with mysteries only guardians would understand, and in the depths below, the ocean sang a song of satisfaction, a ballad of love, rebellion, and the eternal truth that some bonds cannot be broken by crown or cannon, distance or death. The pact was renewed. The guardians sailed free,